Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our 8 p.m. service live. Could my wonderful guests for tonight please turn on your cameras, come on the screen. My name's Dan. I'll be taking you through tonight, and I'm joined by Beck Stanton and Alex, who's just pressing all the buttons on the screen. Alex Drew. It's so good to see you all tonight. If you're watching at home, why don't you comment below and say how wonderful my panel looks tonight. Can I also just say, notice the blue background. Do you like that, Beck?
Yeah, it's lovely. Royal blue.
Yeah. This was the colour of my school house when I was at school in the UK. Anyway, relevant detail. Alex, how are you doing tonight? You all right?
Yeah, I'm a little bit coldy, but I'm all right. I'm snuggly and warm.
All right. You're not supposed to confess that anymore, that sort of thing. You have to keep that all quiet. You know, it's like the COVID shame. Anyway, it's great to see you. If you're joining, why don't you comment below? Let us know where you're tuning in from. Beck, where are you at the moment? I don't think I've seen that room in your house.
I'm down in our creative studio.
Oh, lovely.
Oh,
is this where Matt does your husband does all his YouTube videos?
Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Yeah. I learned how to draw Peppa Pig on the potty from one of those videos, which is actually really useful for being a parent. So I'm grateful for that.
You're so
Beck,
welcome.
You've got something going on. Like, have you got a big event coming up in your life soon?
Oh, the baby. Oh, yes. Yes.
Can you give us is this appropriate? I don't know if this is right, but could you give us a little bump shot, like a side? You don't have to, but I'm sure you probably will. All right. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, there's definitely a baby there. That's great.
Yeah.
So what's the name going to be of the baby?
Oh, well, we have this amazing name that we both really love, and it's a bit unconventional. We're having a girl, which is really exciting. And I'm not going to tell you what the name is.
There's no way of catching you out there. That's great.
No.
So, Beck, you've been in a bit of pain this week. Like, what's been going on? Like, we thought that tonight wasn't going to happen with Alex with the flu. And yourself, you've been laid up a week. Have you been all right?
Yeah. So I've got like sacroiliac pain. So at the bottom of your spine, you've got like a little triangle of bone, and then there's ligaments that connect that to the hip bones. And I've just been having pain in there. And this week, which has been so amazing, is we've worked out the source of the pain, which is that my bottom is very tight. And so I've had the joy of spending about $250 this week on having people rub my bottom, and it's been highly effective. And I can move around and stand up, and I know.
Well, if you just joined us, welcome to church.
Oh, sorry, everyone.
I love it. I'm back overshare.
Can I just go back to one thing you said? I'm not sure we need an icebreaker tonight because the ice is well and truly broken. 10 people have just turned their stream off, so no, not really. You said you pay $250 for, I quote, people. Have you got more than one masseuse? Is it like a four hands kind of situation?
Yes, actually.
Wow.
I got my physio, who's just a darling woman, and then my kind of pregnancy massage therapist, who is also very nice but has very firm hands and sharp thumbs. But they're effective.
Very good. I think we'll leave that there. So it's great to see you.
Everything's going well. That's good.
We've got a few people watching. Lyndall's just jumped on. She's back. Dave's on. Your husband's watching, which is good, Beck. Alex, your husband's watching as well.
Oh, good.
That's me, in case you didn't work that out. We got someone from Perth, which is quite good. Any English people tonight? Not yet. They're probably all at their actual church, so that's all good. I'm sure my mum will be on in a minute. Hi, Rhonda. Rhonda's here, so we're going to begin. Tonight, we're thinking about despair and hope. We've been doing a series looking at the prayer of St. Francis, make me a channel of your peace. And tonight, we land on despair and hope, and we're going to be thinking about the paradox of despair, and we'll say a bit more about that later on. But what I'm going to do is we're going to get straight in and start with an interview, not with Beck, not with Alex, but an interview with the wonderful Laura Cusial, which she was going to join us live tonight, but she's in a car coming back, and we thought it might be a bit awkward if, like, it was dark and it's quite a serious topic. So I filmed an interview of her earlier, which is 5 minutes or so long. So why don't we enjoy that? Comment below. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear lots of encouragement for Laura as she shares about this theme of despair and hope. So Alex and Beck, why don't you turn your cameras off, and then I'll call you back in a little while. But it's great to have you with us, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you later. So the way tonight's going to work is we'll have this video. We're then going to do some Lectio Divina, which is kind of fancy reading of the Bible from the book of Job, which is quite an intense one. We're going deep tonight. And then we're going to hear from Alex and Beck and finish with a prayer. So it's great to have you with us. Why don't we have a little look at this video now? And if you can't hear, please let me know. Well, if you've just joined us, this is an interview with Laura as we think about this theme of despair and hope. So Laura, thanks for joining us. You're away on holiday at the moment, I think, or away for the day up on the Central Coast. Is that right?
Yeah, we're here for the weekend, just celebrating Isabella's birthday with some friends.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to have you with us. I like your earrings. They're pretty, they remind me of England, actually.
Pretty fashionable, huh?
Is it all right to say they're very Essex, or is that a bit rude? I'm not sure.
You can.
Yeah, they look good. They're very now. We've been thinking about this theme of despair and hope. And when you think about that word despair, what comes to mind for you?
First thing that comes to mind for me was when Ryan was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. So for those of you that don't know, Ryan's my son. He's almost 4. When he was 4 weeks old, he was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. And I just, remembering back to that time, I just felt like, although I didn't have like an injury or anything, I just felt this physical pain inside me that I just really can't describe, and I can't relate that to anything else I've ever felt in my life. So yeah, that was probably my biggest moment of despair. Yeah.
And at the moment, COVID-19 is a respiratory infection, so there's some real complications for you guys in that space. So it's not like the despair happened just then at the start. It's something that's been ongoing. Is that right? Do you want to just speak into that?
Yeah. So, we have to constantly be careful about what kind of viruses Ryan picks up, what kind of bacteria he picks up, because any one of those can mean damage to his lungs. And as a result, reduce his lifespan and also his quality of life, and means a hospital stay for us as a family. So that's always stressful.
Yeah, and so as we sort of come out of COVID for you guys, in many ways the restrictions are still there, and isolation in the most appropriate sense is really important for you. So yeah. Just over the last couple of weeks, you've been involved in an Alpha course that we've been running on Zoom. And Alpha is an opportunity to explore life, faith, and Christianity in a really chilled environment. So chilled this time that it's on Zoom. The other day, my internet was so bad, wasn't it, that I had to walk down the road and do it in the dark just to get better internet. But we've got a really good group made up of... It is. We've got a really good group made up of people from the UK, where the internet's much better, and Australia, and it's been really good going on that journey. But last week we talked about suffering, didn't we? Or 2 weeks ago, we talked about this theme of suffering. Can you just share for a moment, why that question was important to you and some of the things that you were wrestling with?
Yeah. So when you actually approached me about the Alpha course, that was definitely one of my biggest I suppose, issues and frustrations with God, was that how can such a wonderful, peaceful, loving God allow suffering, especially with children, especially with my own child and my own experience. And I was really angry about that, and I'd say I still am really angry about that. Yeah, I just didn't really.
Yeah, we talked a bit about that, didn't we, at length? We had a long conversation about it, and we were kind of in agreement with you that there's some stuff you can explain away, like suffering, but when it's kids with like illnesses, it just seems really unfair, and that's really hard. Yeah. So we kind of wrestled with that for about an hour, didn't we? And then went on our way.
Yeah, that was it.
And then last week we kind of came back, and often with these big questions, sometimes giving it a bit of time to reflect on them helps. So what happened then? Like, what shifted for you?
So for me, I was thinking about it a lot. And obviously, like throughout my journey with Ryan, I've been praying a lot for him and for his health. And I kind of came to the conclusion that although I'm still really angry about Ryan's situation, I do feel like God has his hand in that situation. And I look around the world, and there's a lot of people a lot worse off with the same condition as Ryan. And I feel that God is behind like all of the drugs that are coming through to help improve his life. You know, he's behind the wonderful team that support him. He's behind giving me the motivation to, you know, look after him and do my best for him. So I feel like God is in that situation, even though I'm really angry that he won't take that situation away. Yeah. But I definitely feel he has a hand.
It's really helpful. So helpful, because what we don't want to do is just disregard it, and it's okay to be in that place of despair, that place of anger, and ask God those big questions. But at the same time, as you kind of shift your perspective and look back, you can see that in some senses God is working in that situation, even if it doesn't always feel like it.
Yeah. And the fact
Laura, that's been so helpful.
Yeah. Sorry. I was just going to say the fact that Ryan has been really well with it.
No, you go.
He has been really, you know, he's been really good and really healthy. You know, that definitely makes me feel like, you know, God's got this, and God definitely has, you know, has him under his wing, and he's looking out for him and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I find like you've got, there's a Facebook group that you're part of called Kicking CF in the Butt, which is a great name for a group. And we encourage you to just put the link to that below if you could, like during this session, and if someone could paste that. And why don't we all follow or like that page? But what inspires me is that someone like yourself and Ryan and your whole family really give people hope in that situation. So however difficult it is, your story, and I think the way in which you've approached this gives people hope. And yeah, I'm just really encouraged by that. So thank you so much for your time. It's been so good to catch up with you. We'll see you soon. Hopefully we'll get you on live one time if you're not in the car or whatever, but we'll see you soon. All right.
That's it.
Thanks a lot.
That's it. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Wonderful. Well, why don't my panel come back? And wasn't that helpful? So good to hear from Laura as she talked about living with this idea of despair, not just parking it, but going on that journey. We've had some comments come in online, and I think they're really great. Lauren says, love this, Laura. God is with us in the suffering. And hopefully we'll be exploring that tonight, particularly around this theme of despair, because despair in some ways is different to suffering. But Beck, we had a chat the other week, didn't we, where I rang you up and I said, Beck, I'd really love for you to come on the live stream at 8 o'clock. And it was right after one we'd had a couple of weeks ago. And in your usual way, which is wonderful, you said, yeah, I'll come on, but I don't think it's that simple.
I was so cross.
Do you want to elaborate what you meant about that, particularly in relation to despair and hope?
Yeah, that's fine. Look, with all of these topics that we're looking at with the Prayer of St. Francis, it is this process of exploring a spectrum of experience, and the Prayer of St. Francis creates this these polarizing of experiences that feel like there's a good one and there's a bad one, and we need to kind of lean into the good one and abandon the bad one, and you can't have them both at the same time necessarily, or it's a betrayal of the good one to go with the bad one. And I just reject the whole concept that the things that are the dark things of the world and the dark nights of the soul are the bad parts of being a human. That these things belong together and they're part of what being a human is all about. And yeah, the definition of despair is to have a complete absence of hope. And hope is, well, similarly to have a complete absence of despair, but also it's leaning into and looking for something good that's going to happen. And for us, biblical hope adds this extra element, which is expecting that God is going to do something good. And from the place of despair, where there is no hope, how can you have hope when the definition of actually experiencing despair is complete feelings of lost, stuck, alone, completely in the mire? The water is in your lungs. I am drowning and there's no way out. Yeah.
So good. And I suppose the phrase that we like chucked around a bit before we were planning tonight was this idea of like a paradox of despair, in the sense that in the despair, God is with us. In that kind of, I love that imagery you use of like being underwater, not being able to breathe, like when there's nothing left, like God is in that place. And yet, and this is probably where I'd slightly take on what you said. The dream is that there would be an absence of despair. The dream is that we would always be filled with hope. And we're moving towards, we've talked a bit about the new creation and all of that stuff on a number of occasions. If you want to know more about that, just comment below and Jed will explain it all to you or someone like that. But the dream is that we would be without despair, and yet there's beauty in the despair. And I think that's kind of the place we want to sit tonight. Alex, did you want to chuck anything in on that before we move on to our Bible reading?
No, I think head into Job and then we'll come back to it, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So we're going to hear more wisdom from these wonderful people, but what we thought we'd do tonight is a bit of live lectio. And when you think about despair in the Bible, one of the characters that might come to mind is this Old Testament character, Job. Now, Job has got a really interesting story. And when you read through the book, if you were picking one guy that had it really tough, one character in the Bible among many that had it really tough, Job would probably come to mind. We're going to share a bit about his story in a minute, but we're going to try the live lectio again, which we've been doing off and on. So what we're going to ask for you to do is listen to the Bible reading as Beck reads it in a few moments. Have it there in front of you if you like. It's Job chapter 1, verses 6. It's kind of probably about a third of the way through the Bible if you've got a proper one, but you're probably just Googling it or using the app, so it's a bit easier to find. But Job chapter 1, I'm going to post it below as well, verse 6 to 12. So listen out for a word that jumps out for you in the reading. So just one word that jumps out, and we'd love for you to comment below. We'll then take those responses. We'll have a little chat about the passage, and then we'll invite you to share what you think might be going on in more detail. But to start off with, we want one word or one phrase as Beck reads to us. So Beck, why don't you take it away?
Okay, Job chapter 1, starting at verse 6. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth, going to and fro on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power. But on the man himself, do not lay a finger. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord.
Nice light reading for a Sunday night. So thanks for that, Beck. So what we'd love for you to do now is just respond with one word that jumped out at you, one thing that jumped out. And if you just comment below. But first, I'd love to hear from Alex and Beck. What was your one word? Maybe Alex, you could go first to give Beck a chance to have a look.
Mine isn't a word, but it's a short phrase. Is that okay? I'm not very good at
Completely
picking up. Maybe it's quite a long phrase, actually. I think it's just that last section. Satan went out from the presence of the Lord.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same. It gives me this like shiver feeling.
Mm.
And I'm going to just make you wait before you say any more. And this is the beauty of doing like Bible study and reading the Bible in this way, that the temptation is to fill the space with a lot of words, and actually we just want to sit with that for a few moments. Mine was hedge. Where was it? Hedge around him. A hedge around him. That just jumped out at me, and I nearly tried to explain why. So what I think we'll do, we'll have some responses from people online. So Kate says, oh, John doesn't have his own Facebook page, so Kate has to write for him. So John's word is fear. Fear. I wonder if there's any other words coming through. So if you've just joined us, we're doing live Lectio, and Lectio is just a way of reading the Bible that enables us to home in on specific phrases and allow the text to speak to us. We believe that God is always speaking, and one of the ways he does that is through the Bible. So why don't you comment below with your word or phrase? We'd love to hear from you. Yeah, Lyndall said hedge jumped out for her too. And it's really interesting as you do this, because you notice patterns, like Beck and Alex noticed that, and different ones noticed hedge. It'd be great to hear from one or two others. Phil writes, I'm struggling because I have so many questions about this difficult passage. And just to say, Phil, we're gonna be exploring this passage, but we're probably not going to answer those questions, because I don't think it's neat and tidy. I think there's so much going on here. Yeah, Amy said the same. Why don't we read it once more through? Alex, have you got it in front of you there?
I don't actually. Sorry, I've
Don't worry, I've got it.
My one device is my little video camera.
Beck, why don't you read it again?
Sure. Okay, I'm going to read it just a touch faster this time. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going to and fro on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord.
Thanks, Beck. So why don't you comment below? We'd love to hear your questions, and we're just going to talk for a few moments about this passage and about the book as a whole. When I think about despair, I think about Job. I don't know if the others on the panel can relate to that. What do we know about the story? Like, what happens in the story? Do you want to have a go, guys? What happens right at the start of Job's story? Or different themes that happen, and I'll fill in the gaps.
I guess just everything that is in his household and his property and his family just gradually are all taken from him. and he just holds tight. He just holds tight to trusting that God is still good, I guess. You kind of get that sense that he holds on to that despite these friends that kind of come and whisper things in his ear and offer all sorts of reasons to give up on God. He seems to have some sort of internal core that holds tight.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, so the book kind of kicks off there where Job kind of seems to have everything, seems to have it all together, and he also has this really great relationship with God. He's like kind of one of the good ones, so to speak, though it's probably an unhelpful way to put it. And all of his property and his children are taken from him. And then he goes on this journey of kind of living in that despair. And there's two like discourses between God and Satan. It starts with all of everything that Job has being taken away. And then in chapter 2, he gets this kind of skin disease as well. So he doesn't only experience the kind of emotional or character testing, it's also physical pain that he goes through. And perhaps some of us can relate to that at different points in our life. What else goes on, Beck? Like what comes next? You didn't know you were getting a like Sunday school test today, did you guys?
No, but it's brutal. It's just deeply brutal.
Yeah. Jan's just asked, just written below why. And it's really easy not to pick these passages. It would have been easier for us to pick something nice and neat, or something with a bit of hope in it. But as you read Job's story, you don't get that, and it is brutal. The one thing I would say is if we want to understand Job, we need to read the whole book. And I remember when I was younger doing like one of those Bible in a year things, and it took me about 10 years probably to do the Bible in a year because it was just so dense, that Old Testament bit. But I particularly remember Job. And I remember reading this first bit and I thought, that's kind of interesting stuff. And Job's about 42, 43 chapters. And it's kind of like you got the first 2 chapters, which explain this really difficult discourse between God and Satan, which we'll talk a bit about in a moment. And then there's these probably 35 chapters of just like Job just crying out of despair. And it's only in reading those chapters that you understand, not that we can ever understand, but you get a sense of what that despair was all about. And it's almost like the author of the book has framed it in that way. We don't know whether Job was actually a real person or whether this literally happened, but we know it's a really important story. And when we think about suffering, when we think about God's role and his response to suffering, this is one of the passages that we come to time and time again. So it goes on and on. Job waits for God to speak, and then finally he speaks. And God's response isn't necessarily in 2020 that satisfactory. I'm sorry I'm not making this all neat and tidy for us today, but God says to him, in response to him crying out to God saying, why did you take my family away? Why did you give me this disease? Why are my friends trying to make me like turn away from you, God? Why did you let this happen? And God's response is, where were you when I created the stars? Where is wisdom found? Like, why do you get to ask me these questions? This is brutal. This is like full on. And then right at the end of the story, in my mind, there's a dissatisfaction because most people would think that the story ends with hope. Like Job gets a new family, gets more children, gets all of his sheep back, becomes richer than he ever was. And yet, you feel a bit dissatisfied because you think his other children still died. He still had to go through that disease. He still had to go through all of that despair. And I just wonder whether the beginning and the end of Job, it's confusing. It's hard to get our heads around, and we can discuss that in a few moments. But I wonder whether the book is about that bit in the middle, about understanding what it looks like to live in that despair of losing everything and being right at the bottom of the pit, a bit like Beck alluded to, and crying out to God and saying, why? What is going on? That probably doesn't answer any questions, but I think the point I want to make is we need to read the whole book. So we're going to do that now. No, not really. But I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to do that like over the period of a few weeks. Why not read the whole book? There's a question that's come in from Rhonda, which is there a way out of the despair? And if so, what is it? we're going to come back to that later, because I think some of Alex and Beck's responses will help us with that later. And Jan says it probably helps us look at suffering and not always find an explanation. And I think that's really important, that when it comes to suffering, you don't want to put a bow on it. Whenever we have that question on Alpha, it comes up every single time. And what we say to them right at the start is, there's no answer to this question. But there are ways of looking at it, a bit like Laura alluded to, that might help us. Do you guys have anything to add, or any questions off the back of the passage? Sorry, that turned into a mini sermon there.
I just I don't think I have anything profound to add at all, other than I just find this such a challenging story, and it's one that I have read and grappled with before, and still find really hard, and but almost appreciate the I don't know, the kind of the disorientation that you feel when you read it, the kind of confusion, I don't know, I find it quite helpful that it is a story that isn't entirely neat and doesn't really like tie it all up and sort it all out at all for me. It leaves me with lots of questions. It's a story that leaves me with more questions it probably is answered, and I don't know, it's good to have a bit of that in there, I think, isn't it? But yeah, it's challenging. It's really challenging.
Yeah, I really like that. At the moment that God comes to Job, you're wanting and yearning for him to come like a cushion and just sweep him up and pull him in and make it right and undo the things and do the miracle and pat him on the back and give him praise. And God says to him in chapter 40, brace yourself like a man. I will question you and you shall answer me. So I guess God draws near. Does it get better for Job? I don't know. Which gives us a really interesting thing to think about what it means to be in the place of despair when God comes to us. What actually happens in that moment?
Yeah. So good. It's almost like he reaches the bottom of the pit, and then it's like, here's another slap, and then you're now going to respond to me. I just listened to you ask me lots of questions. Now I've got some questions for you. Yeah, that's really helpful. Andrew has written, despair exists around the world, and it's important to understand it can't just disappear for many. Really helpful. That got a couple of likes. I wonder if there's any other questions or responses. Phil says, thought. In one sense, Job, the book, frees us from asking the question, why? Does anyone want to respond to that? I like that.
And perhaps raises the question, what now?
Yeah, because I remember going along to this talk once, and it was about suffering. And I think it might have even been an Alpha talk, but normally you like follow a script, but this lady had completely gone off script, and it was really great. And the question she asked at the end was, she said, why does God allow suffering? And then she paused and kind of looked us all in the eye and then said, why do you allow suffering? And when we think about despair, like, why is it okay for us to be in despair? Well, as friends of people in despair, particularly at the moment, what are we going to do about it? I don't think it's that simple, but I think it reframes that question.
And yet there is something really important about the why question, I think. Like Jesus asks that question to his father, doesn't he? Like, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
And then the like Psalms like echo this why. Where have you gone from me, God? Why have you stepped away from me? And you get that kind of rephrasing almost of Jesus' like ultimate question to God, like all over the Psalms. And I think there is there's an invitation to ask the why. Like, we may not ever get a fully satisfactory answer, but I feel like that is the invitation of Lamentations, of the Psalms. Like, that's, I don't know, that's what we're invited to ask, I think. Just to lay it out yeah, it's good.
Have you guys seen? I don't know if people at home have seen it as well, but the Passion of Christ, which was Mel Gibson's kind of creation of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. And have you seen that, Beck?
No.
Oh yeah, don't watch it till you've had the baby. It's so full on, and like it's an 18 for a reason. I think they're called something else in Australia. What do you call a film that only adults can watch? R-rated, is that right? Yeah, sorry, we call it an 18. Only over 18s can watch it. It's really, really clever. But in that depiction, it's really interesting, and we see that in this passage as well. That Satan is depicted. He's depicted in different ways, like as a serpent, as this kind of weird like baby character, and you get the sense that there's this kind of battle going on in that journey. And we know, like, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane before he was crucified, like has this moment of like conversation with God, like, take this cup from me, take this away from me, I don't want to drink this cup, yet not my will but yours be done. And then and in the depiction in the Passion of Christ, which I think is really helpful, like Satan appears. And I was doing a bit of reading on Job earlier, and it's really interesting, like when we read the translation in NIV, it says Satan, it uses that term Satan, it kind of names this person. But probably like in Old Testament prose, like in that kind of way of writing, a better term would be kind of adversary. And the imagery that's slightly more helpful, rather than this like specific person of Satan, like this kind of person that's having this chat with God, because that feels a bit strange. It's a bit more like a law court. So on the one hand, you'd have like the prosecution, and on the other hand, you'd have the defense. And so the adversary is kind of like a prosecutor. And like in the Old Testament times, there would have been different gods. And when they used the term God, it didn't always necessarily refer to Yahweh, like the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament too. So that analogy might be a bit more helpful when you think about this back and forth between God and Satan. It's not so much that God's kind of going, yeah, go for it, but there's this kind of forward and back between a prosecution and a defense. But ultimately, it still begs the question, and the question that Laura asked on Alpha. I get this, like, I get that God might be in the healing. I get that God might be helping out with Ryan's diagnosis. And yet, why did he let it happen? Why does he let it happen?
Well, that depends on your theology, doesn't it? On whether, like the two examples we've looked at tonight of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and of Job are both times where God has purposefully allowed and led his creation into a place of suffering. I'm not sure that all suffering is like that. And I guess that depending on what you think about that will determine kind of whether you agree or not. But there is also there's a suffering that happens that's a consequence of life and of action. And we're not actually talking about the suffering. We're talking about what happens after the suffering, which is the despair. This terrible things have happened, or difficult things have happened, or a series of events have happened, and now I'm hopeless. Now I can see there's no way out. It's not kind of about the things that have happened. It's about the state of the person. And I think it's really special, and I don't want to sound too optimistic about it, really special that we have the capacity to experience despair. Jesus experienced despair, this God, take the cup from me, I can't. And he quickly moved to hope. But if it's your will, then I'll go, and I trust you. But for us, that quick movement to hope isn't always kind of what we can do. When you are completely hopeless, you do often get really stuck. The humanness of despair is real, and it's fleshy. And I think there's a disconnect between often our believers' expectations on what we should do in the place of despair and what the reality of what we're capable of doing is. And because believers, we have this urge to lift and look and go up and get out and align yourself with God, that we create this idea that when you're in the despair, that God is not there, that God is elsewhere. And so you have to ascend and get away from the living in order to be with God. And I just think there's something to be said about finding God in the place of despair. And that's kind of what Rhonda was saying, asking that question of like, how do we get out of despair? And I think there's really something really special, and that kingdom magic happens in the despair. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's so good. I think it's so good. There's a real danger in the church, particularly in the 20th century, and Alex is going to say a bit more about this later, that we just want to like move people really quickly. So it's like, oh, like come forward for healing and then you'll be all right, or there's something wrong with you because you haven't been healed. And you know, I'm not speaking about any church in particular, but there's been a real danger that we're trying to move people too quickly through different things. We've had a couple of comments come in online which are really helpful as well, which kind of come alongside that. Firstly, people saying wise words, Beck. So there we go. Yeah, Rhonda also said, you know, this question of why comes from the when we first speak, like why mum, why dad, like it's almost within us to ask the question of why. And we see that in Job, don't we? But actually there's beauty in staying in that place. Matt, I don't know if you know him, Beck, said, I'm fairly sure Job is, and he's right, one of the oldest books in the Bible, 400 plus years older than Genesis. I find it helpful to remember that this reflects one of the earliest understandings of how to answer the question of suffering. Also that people would have been wrestling for this for as long as we've been asking questions. And it's like, in that time, in that culture, some of the things that happened to Job would look different then to how they look today. We have to bear that in mind when we're reading this, particularly the Old Testament. Yeah, Phil says something really helpful. Another thought, we have a God who participates in our suffering, who weeps with us. I find it helpful to focus on this rather than why. And Kate agrees that in God, like in Jesus at the cross, there's this kind of solidarity that we have when we're in that place of despair. My God, why have you forsaken me? Like Jesus experiences this despair in the moment of his crucifixion and physically right up until that point. And of course, after, we don't know what happened when Jesus died, but we know there's this kind of battle that goes on. There's quite a lot here, so I'm going to keep going if that's all right.
Can I chip in on that one?
Yeah, thanks.
I guess this idea of like it's one of the Beatitudes, isn't it? Like blessed are those who mourn, and it's almost like we have kind of forgotten. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with what's been shared. Like, you know, Jesus is the man of sorrows, and it's almost as if we forget those things. We move on to Easter Sunday, and we're not willing to kind of dwell and to stay on the blackness, the bleakness of Easter Saturday, where there appears to be no hope. But, you know, I think it's great thoughts from people.
Yeah, it's some really good stuff. Someone's saying thanks, Beck. They hadn't thought about experienced despair as a place where we imagine Jesus. And then one thing that came in from Kate, which I pinned, which I thought was really helpful, is to say it's interesting that Job's initial response to hitting rock bottom, to hitting this despair, is to worship. And I like that. And I remember, like, I was going through something a little while ago and speaking to my mentor, and I was in a really bad way. And he said, Dan, you've just got to worship. Like, you've just got to pray and worship. Don't try and do anything else. Don't try and come up with a theology or answer. Just sit in that place and worship. And that's what we see here.
It's good.
We're gonna respond to some more of your comments, but we're just going to leave Job there. I think we could talk about him all night and his experience, but we wanted to hear a bit more from Beck and Alex. And I know, guys, in some of the stuff we've prepared, we've touched on that already. And we're going to still aim to finish by 9 o'clock tonight. But there was a really good conversation there. But why don't we start with Beck? Do you want to just tell us a bit about your day job, like what you do in a day when you're not going live on Facebook with H3A?
I'm a mum. Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah.
No, I write children's books and create children's books alongside Matt. That's what we've started a company, and that's what we do full time from our studio in the backyard.
right where you are now. That is where the magic happens.
This is where the magic happens. Yeah.
Yeah. So I imagine, like, with being an author, there's a certain amount of like vulnerability and probably even despair that kind of comes with like your role, because it's not like even in my job there's like a regularity to it in a sense, but you're just putting it out there and then waiting to see what comes back. Do you want to just speak into that a bit?
Yeah, look, writing and drawing and creating is like any other creative field. When you make something, it comes from within you, it takes a form, and then you share it with the world. And as you put it out into the world, there is a million different ways that it could be received. It will be loved by some, it'll be hated by some, it'll be picked apart, it'll be meaning will be found in it that was never intended, but it will become richer and it will fall apart. And as the creator of that thing, and you have no control over how it is going to be received. So it's hugely exposing. You have to be very vulnerable and have this mix of like soft face to create and keep creating, and like hard shell to like ignore the things that will cut you off at the knees and stop that vulnerable creative space. And at the same time, we don't have time for things like writer's block or I just can't create today. We're working fast and we're building things. And so as an author, you never read your Goodreads account. It's like a form of self-harm. You just stay away.
It's really helpful. And just share, like, John's posed a question which we'll come to in a few moments. It's a good question, we'll make sure we respond to it, but before we get to that, just share, you had an experience recently, right, where you'd kind of put some stuff out there and then it kind of didn't work out necessarily as you thought it would. Not your fault, of course, but yeah, do you want to just speak into that?
Oh, and not my fault either. Yeah, we just had a really difficult year last year. Both Matt and I were creating the first books in new series, and for a whole series of reasons, we worked on them for the duration of the year, and come October, everything got folded and put away, and I suffered a huge personal blow. My publisher came to me and said, I think either you need to upskill or we need to get somebody else to illustrate your books. Oh my gosh. I don't think you could say anything more cutting to a creative, like, it was you are not good enough to do the thing that you are doing. And there was just no way out. We were trying to build this thing. We thought we were working together. We were trying to work together, and it just kept falling over. We lost sight of, is it good? We couldn't kind of measure the goodness of what we were creating. We always have a good idea about if we think it's good, and we lost that. We became completely disoriented together. We couldn't support each other in finding a way out. We just had to support each other in staying above water. And the negativity that just kept flooding into our workspace and our creative space, I would describe as giving us a position of despair. There's no way out. And the only way out at the end of the day was to kill all the projects. And then this year we're starting again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Beck. Do you want to tell me where the publisher lives? Again.
Again,
it's
like
interesting.
It's not their problem. It's a mute. Yeah, it was a.
But it's interesting that it's like there's like a natural response there of, like, for your friends, right? You're like, I don't want you to feel like that. Like that's not it. I think you're great. Do you know what I mean? Like we do that stuff in community. It was really interesting that was my jokey, but actually, like, my response, like, oh, idiots, they don't know. And yet that's not it, right? But there's that kind of community tension almost. in that stuff. And Matt says, yeah, that sucked.
Yeah, it did. It sucked really bad. But like, what is the way out? Kind of to Rhonda's question, coming back to Rhonda's question again, and I may be leading us on here, so do stop.
No, it's good. I think it's helpful.
Okay, I'm going to say where I got to, and then I have scripture to kind of suggest what we should do in the despair moment to find hope. So it was only in the complete breaking down of the things that we thought we had built and that we had built that we were able to then start from scratch. And by starting from scratch, what we've been building this year is so much better, and it has goodwill, and it has buy-in, and it has people invested and excited about it. And we've relearned how to work in a healthy way. We've formed new work habits. We've been able to think clearer and create measures to decide, is this good? And we feel confident and excited about what we're creating this year. A complete contrast to last year, but it's only by getting to that rock bottom spot and you realize you have nothing in your hands anymore, that you have to then start searching for something else. And so in despair, when you have no hope, where despair is the distinct absence of hope, what do we do? Where do we go to just start to move in a direction where we're looking for God and where we're finding God? And Philippians chapter 4, verse 8 says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And all of those things can be done from a place of despair, because none of those things have to come from within. I don't have to muster the strength from within me to find the hope and channel the oomph and get the lift. All of those things are outside of me. There are things that I can observe in the community that's around me. And so where I'm kind of up to in thinking about despair and how to just scoop out of that place of despair just slightly is that the role of community to bring things that are true and noble and right and pure and lovely, admirable and excellent and praiseworthy. It's not to say, get out of, like, cheer up, let's move on. It's to just hint at the things of life that are exquisite and that are precious and that shine. These are like the glowworms in the cave, or the fireflies in the night. There's just little glimpses that just flicker to help you know that God is at work, and you can stay in despair for as long as you need to stay in despair. But this is what the hope is, that there is more and there is something, and that God is at work and he is alive and the glowworms are out.
Beck, that's so helpful, and got some really helpful feedback online as well, which I'm sure you'll see, but people are saying, yeah, they love this passage and the reflection on it, and thanks for sharing and for your vulnerability. The question that came in from John, and I think, Alex, you can speak into this slightly, was around, does despair exist on a spectrum, or is it absolute? Is it the complete lack of hope? It feels like we're using a whole bunch of words for despair, but despair can't be every negative emotion, can it? There's more to that question, but I know, Alex, you were going to talk a little bit about this idea of lament, and we kind of touched on it a bit earlier, but do you want to just, like, really briefly, and then we'll get you to read? Yeah. I bet you can stay on, but we it's all good. Yeah,
it's good. Yeah, I guess I won't tell you the whole tale. There's lots to say and lots that could be said, but I guess where I did a lot of my learning about this was probably a particular time. So it was a second it was Christmas time, and Dan and I had this. We were going through our second round of IVF, and we, for some reason, both of us just thought it had happened that time, and instead we found ourselves over that Christmas having a quiet Christmas, grieving the loss of this little life that we had thought had worked. And I remember this note that I got from a friend who who said to me all sorts of gorgeous things that you'd want to hear from a friend when you're kind of heartbroken. But she just said, so snuck into that note, there was this little line that said, "I just wonder whether your kind of sunshine personality actually needs to learn to lament." I remember reading that phrase and just being deeply frustrated and angry, and everything in me was like, I do not want to lament. Everything I knew about lament, which wasn't a lot actually, it was something that wasn't really, I never really heard a sermon on lament. I had done I'd kind of gone after it and read a little bit about the Psalms, and I discovered that a whole third of the Psalms in the Bible are laments, and yet they don't feel like they're present and there in our gatherings and church services that I'd been to kind of all my life, really. And so I remember this reaction in me, but it stayed with me. That little phrase, this learning to lament, just stayed with me. And I remember then literally a few days later, then going back to work, and I was dreading. I just wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready to go back to work. We started the year. I worked for a charity where we began the year with like a retreat time where we went away and kind of ate meals together and prayed together and drank good gin together. It was extroverts heaven, and normally I loved it. It's the thing I look forward to and was all in for, and I was dreading it. I didn't want to go, but I was there, of course. And I remember the first morning of the first full day of our retreat to start the year was led, in fact, by Mark Scandrette, who some of you will remember in an interview a few weeks back, and he was our kind of speaker, our guest speaker. And he he gathered us round and he did a little bit of input, and he said, look, I want to just send you off, and I'm going to give you 2.5 hours to yourself, and in that time I want you to learn to lament. And everything in me was like, I don't want to lament. I don't want to sit and dwell in the pain of this anymore. I want to distract myself. I want to move forward. I want to find a way to kind of leave this behind. I don't want to lament. And yet that is what we were being offered to do with that time, 2.5 hours by ourselves to learn to lament. And so I had a go, and it was messy and it was scrawled all over my kind of journal, but I just thought I've got to try and put it to God and have a go. So I don't know whether you want me to read that now, Dan, or whether you want to talk first, but yeah. I think maybe just one thing to say would be that I think what I realised, there's so much that I wanted to kind of just echo and add to what Beck was sharing, and thank you for sharing, Beck. But there is something incredibly vulnerable but incredibly biblical about lament, this kind of in vulnerability, naming that which is deep inside of you. It's like not being fearful anymore of your like interior world. It's naming what is wrong in God's good world, which is why hope and despair in my mind are one. Like they are one, and it's something about in naming them to God that they become visible. They're almost like they're able to be tended to. They're able to be kind of they're open to remedy, and they're able to be healed. Maybe they're not healed the way we expect them to be, but there's something about just the naming of it, that the vulnerable naming of the hurt to God. And I guess the Psalms give us that image, don't they, of naming the complaint and asking for God's help, but they always end, and yet, is that, not my will but yours? It's that, and yet I know that you are good, God, and yes, I know that you are are enough, I guess. And that's that beautiful pattern of a lament that I just felt I hadn't really heard enough people tell me that or teach me that. I heard a lot of people come alongside me and want to offer me that it was going to be okay, that God would teach me things through this suffering, that, you know, all this stuff that was just a desire genuinely to make my situation well again. But actually, it was much more about them being uncomfortable in the place of pain, like uncomfortable with my pain. And so there was something beautiful that I hadn't really discovered before about lament, which was, yeah, the naming it to God, the saying what is wrong with God's good world to God, and yet trusting that he remains good, that he remains God. Yeah.
Alex, that's so helpful. Thanks for sharing that. I think what we'll do is, if you just stay on for a few moments, right at the end, we'll get you to read that.
Yeah, nice.
And then we'll have the St. Francis prayer and a blessing. Beck, thank you so much for today. You've been wonderful. Can we give Beck lots of emoji love, and we'll have you on again soon, I'm sure. Will you come back, Beck?
Oh, sure. Sure. Anytime.
Oh, wonderful. All right, well, thanks so much. Feel free to jump on Facebook and carry on the conversation on there. But yeah, if you leave the meeting now, that'd be great. Thanks so much. There you go again, Dan, telling people to leave church. It's not good. Alex, you just hold fire for a minute and perhaps mute your camera. Before we go and finish on the last bit, what I wanted to say tonight, before we go on notice, was a couple of things. Firstly, to say, if you've been affected by anything that you've heard tonight, or something's been particularly challenging, please contact us on the details that are pinned below. The phone number there is my phone number. If you want to just send a text and say, I'd really like to talk to someone, but I don't want to talk to you, that's completely fine. We can put you in touch with someone. And that email account's only read by one person. So if you want to email or text us on the number below, we would see it as a privilege to serve you in that way. We also just wanted to acknowledge that I know when we were like trying to have kids, there's nothing worse than someone talk about their struggles with fertility and then have a baby at the end, because in that place of waiting for that and waiting for something that may never happen, it's brutal. So we just wanted to name and acknowledge that, and again say, if you'd like to talk to someone about that, it doesn't need to be people like myself that are parents, but we can put you in touch with someone, and we'd love to have that conversation with you. We are enjoying having this time together at 8 o'clock at night and 9:30. And so in the coming weeks, we're going to post on Facebook tomorrow and email out in e-news, which is our regular newsletter, a survey about our meeting times. It seems that if there isn't a spike, that the way we meet together is going to be able to shift very soon. And so we'd love your feedback on how you found some of the stuff during COVID, and how you found the time change, like moving our gathering to 4 p.m. gathering to 9:30 and having this one in the evening. So we'd love to hear from you. So please fill out that survey for your whole household. We'd really like to hear what you've got to say about that. The other thing to say is that next Sunday is Pentecost. Pentecost is like the third festival after like Christmas and Easter. It's kind of like the third one, and it's when we celebrate and remember the coming of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost in power. It's a great time of unity, and so there's 2 occasions you can get involved next week. There won't be a Sunday night 8 o'clock next week, but we are joining together with Soul Survivor, arranged by a church called Ruach and Manly Life and Seaforth Baptist Church and 1 or 2 other churches, to do a kind of united celebration on Saturday night, which has been organised by a wonderful man called Matt, not Beck's Matt Gelding. And so I'm going to be giving a 1-minute reflection. I've got a 1-minute reflection, and then one of our worship leaders is going to sing a song. So please log on for that. Lots of information on that coming this week. The other thing says that we'll have a kind of all-together service next Sunday morning. So at 9:30, everyone will be in. There'll be a sermon at that one, so it'll be a bit different to our normal ones. And we'll have our usual story from Jan and camera work from Andrew. So we're really looking forward to that. As we close, I'm going to invite Alex back on and invite her to read her lament. And what I want to say is the reason we are finishing with a lament today is that we don't want to put a neat bow on this issue. Despair, we believe, is not something that we want to rush or move on from. We believe God can speak in that place of despair And yet, we have the resurrection and we wait for that hope of new life, new creation, restored Eden. So we're going to finish with Lament. Then I'm going to say the St. Francis prayer and give us a final blessing. But again, if you want to talk to someone or you want to continue the conversation, feel free to get in touch with us. So Alex, please read to us.
Great. This is literally like chopped out of an old journal, so hopefully I'll be able to just about work out my scrawlings. Learning to lament. This feels like untrodden ground, an unfamiliar tongue. I've sat with others in their pain. I've tried not to offer empty promises and neat theological bows, but to sit in my own loss, my own disorientation. Well, that feels dangerous. Dangerous and a little self-indulgent. I've trained myself like an obedient lab to let people into some of the pain, a digestible slice. But I feel deeply uncomfortable leaving them there. So before anyone is pulled too deep, I take us back to the surface for air but I felt so held in people's prayers. And God knows what he's doing. It's all in his timing. I daren't stay too long or too deep in the well of sadness, because there I feel out of control. There I confront the reality that this life is not mine to rule. And there I'm slapped in the face with feelings of insignificance and emptiness, barrenness. I am less a woman, and perhaps I always will be. In him, in you, I live and move and have my being. I am held, sustained in the womb of God, and yet I cannot carry life. I cannot hold on to life for more than a few days. A faint line, a faint hope that dissolves into disappointment. God, you knit me together in my mother's womb, and yet my own cycles cannot follow the same pattern. Is this some sort of cruel way to prepare us for parenthood? These things are sent to make us stronger. That doesn't sound like your voice, Father. The bruised smile across my stomach, my body pumped with hormones from all sides, gels, tablets, and injections. And at each stage, trying to make the right decision, not to grab your role in this strange dramatization and play God. All for what? I know this is a story that others share, but I feel alone, God. Even my body doesn't feel like it belongs to me. I had others walking with me, but their stories, like any other good church testimony, have birthed new life. Little miracles that speak of your faithfulness. I want your faithfulness. Be faithful to us. Be faithful to me. Help me to be faithful to you. This feels like untrodden ground, an unfamiliar tongue. I'm learning to lament.
Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much to seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, and it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. May Christ, the Son of Righteousness, scatter the darkness from your path and make him ready to meet you again when he comes in glory. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always. Amen.